Hi, I'm Mark Hoth and welcome to Swift Almanac. The first screen that I want to get up and running for our Swift Almanac, the channel app, is the settings screen. And this is basically a test case. It will be loading information out of GitHub and saving that information into Firebase. So it allows us to do the input and output from the databases that we're using and displaying them on our user interface. Once we have the basics of the reading and writing from our two databases, it's relatively straightforward to complete our project. The only other thing we need to do is worrying about payments. So let's see how this is done. G'day and welcome back. So here is our main front-facing window and information page, which is not doing anything. And this is our settings cog. And basically what we're going to do is when we click on the settings cog, we're going to bring up this screen. We're going to get the username, email, and the avatar picture out of GitHub. And we've still got our logout button so we can log out of the application. And if you looked at the last application, this was just a view controller. There was no Nav Controller, so we've implemented a Nav Controller here, and you cancel, you can go back and you can access that from anywhere. And it always takes you back to the front screen currently. So that's what we are looking to do, and in the next lesson we're going to add some credit card information down here. But let's have a look at what we have done in order to do this. So the first thing under our app delegate plus Windows extension, the move to the settings window, we have implemented a Nav Controller. So we create the settings view controller, we basically embed a Nav Controller using the settings view controller as the root view controller, and then we set the app delegate root view controller equal to the Nav Controller, and that gives us our navigation controller up here. And so then when we go to the settings view controller, what we need to do at the very start is we've already got our logout button, which we've had previously. It's down here, and we've got these three items. We have the avatar view, we have a name label above, and we have the email label below. I've started work on the Stripe API, but we're not covering that now, so you don't need to worry about those 5 things. So in our view did load, we want to set the navigation item title to say settings, and we want to set the navigation bar to be not translucent, which gives us this white background. And we want to set up this settings button, really should say cancel button, I suppose. Let's change that, let's call it the cancel button. Not the cancel button, the cancel button. So this cancel button is what's taking us back to the main screen, and we've got this selector back to the main tab bar controller, and down at the bottom back to the main tab bar controller just calls move to main window, and for the time being move to the main window. That's just calling our tab bar controller, and that's why we're always coming back to the first screen, because we haven't saved which screen we're currently on when we're coming and going. We may or may not want to do that. The reason why we might want to do it is it's a nice interface, and the reason why we might not want to do it is people aren't going to go to the settings page particularly often, so it's not going to be a massive inconvenience for people. In any event, under our settings view controller, in the setup views, we just take the name out of my user and the email out of my user, and we've got this avatar view, and we're getting that link here out of my user shared avatar URL, which is something I've added. So if we go to our users.graphql, under our get user QL, we just had name and email, and I've added the avatar URL. So when we call get user, we're getting this avatar URL back, which is a string, and I'll go into the Firebase and it's all saved later. But basically, once we have that string, we've created an extension, really nifty extension, for our image view, and it's called downloaded from, and we have a URL extension, and we have a string extension. And if you've just got a string, then you pass string and it calls the method above, downloaded from URL. So basically, if you've got a string, the first thing it does is it converts the string into a URL, and if it can't do that, it returns. And then it calls the top method, and in top method it says, well, we want this image that we get back, we want to scale so the aspect fits, and the content mode is the mode that we pass along. And then we do this URL data task, which is basically calling the URL, and we get some data and a response and an error. And basically we say, we do all these checks, and if everything works out fine, that is, our response is good, our status code is 200, which is okay, our MIME response is of type image, and we get some data back and there are no images. So we do all these things and it works, then we say our image is what the data is, and then we call dispatch main async, and the reason we do that, of course, is because it's a user interface kit item, and we need to make sure we're on the main queue, otherwise we're going to crash. And so we just set the image to be the image from the data we've received from the URL, and all of that is, where is it? All of this is running in a background thread. And so when it comes back, we get back onto our main thread, we set the image, and it will redraw for us. Now there's some basic caching that goes on in any app, but you will find the first time that loads it will take a second or two, and then after that it'll be pretty quick to turn up. So in our settings, we're just making this one call saying avatar downloaded from, and the link, which is a string in our data type, and that's basically making everything work. So how did we get these three values, the avatar, URL, the name, and the email address? Now I've made a change to my class and I've set it up like this. Now I think it was a singleton last time, but what I've done is I've set this up as a public private set property, which means that the properties name, email, and avatar, each of those are public to read, so you can call them just by saying myuser.shared.avatar URL, but they're private to set, and the only way they can be set is through this private method. Through this method anyway. So if we look at what's going on, if you recall, when we run our application at the very start, we add this listener to say what is our login state. And our login state is either going to be we're authorized or we're not. So if we are not authorized when we start up, then we open up our login window and we have to wait for someone to log in. If we are logged in, then we get the current user, which is passed to us through the add state did change listener. And my neighbor just started using their vacuum, so I've just closed the window. So if we do get the user, we've got the user, and then the user has this function, or this property I should say, of a user ID or a UID, and we also want to set that for convenience as a variable, and I'll show you why in a minute. And then what we want to do is we want to load our access token for GitHub, and we want to load our current user from our database, and then once we've done that, we want to move to our main window. So what is our myuser.shared load current user doing? Well, it's calling a Firebase method called load current user. We'll add more to this later, so it doesn't look so silly and redundant. And in my Firebase, we get into some Firebase code. So in our Firebase code, the way you access Firebase is there's this database reference, which is quite long. So again, for convenience, we create this dbref property. And if we go down to load current user, we've got a print statement saying we've entered this method. And then essentially we're writing a path here. So our path is our base dot child or slash users, dot child our user ID, and every user has a unique user ID. So if you're looking at our path, it's going to be, for instance, like a DOS style path. It would be like C:/ slash users slash user01 or something like that, but this is a lot longer than user01. And then we'd have another user would be like C:/ slash users slash user02, etc. So that's this is essentially a path that uniquely identifies a value that we're looking for, and a file structure is a good way of looking at this, because this is not necessarily just a key and a value, but there could be another further path all the way along. So what we're doing here is we're looking for observing a single event, and in Firebase you can either observe continuously for changes, or you can observe once just to get the current state of the data. So for our user, this is not going to change on an ongoing basis, and if it does, it's only going to change from within our app. So we only need to look for this information once. So we're looking for the value of this pathway here, and we're going to run this as a closure, and we'll get back a snapshot. And when we get our snapshot back, we get this snapshot that value is a dictionary, and then the three things that we're looking for are name, email, and avatar URL, and that's what we're getting back from our user graph: name, email, and avatar URL. And for consistency, all of these fields are name, email, avatar URL. They're all spelled exactly the same. Now, because our API.Swift is generated for us, we can't really use global constraints, or global constants in order to do this, but in any event, that's what everything means. So this is basically saying get the name from the name value, or the name in the dictionary of value, and if we can't find it, or if we get nil, then make it an empty string. And we do that with name, email, and the avatar URL. And then we call our set properties for my user, which is going to set these values as our. It's pretty straightforward what that does. And then if there's an error, it gives us an error, and then we do this myuser.shared.isSet, and isSet is basically saying, well, do we already have this this information for GitHub? And if we don't, then that is if it's the first time that we are doing this Firebase call. So we're always going to call this this load current user, and the first time we call it, like in part of our the first time we run the app and authorize a person, the first time we do it, there's going to be no data in our Firebase database. So this is actually going to return, or this is empty, then this isSet is going to be false, and then we need to get the current user. Getting the current user is what's calling this users graph and getting the information out of GitHub. And then if we follow all the way through, get the current user, calls our get user QL query. We do our Apollo fetch, we come back, and then we go Firebase save current user, and we want to save the name, email, and avatar that we got back. So we nick back through to Firebase, and here is our save current user, and that's just taking a name, email, and avatar URL, which are all strings. We create this this dictionary, which we simply call data, and then we write to the exact same path here, which is users.userid, and this one here it's users.userid, and then we set the value for the data, and it will write name, email, and avatar URL with the corresponding values. So if we were to go into Firebase, it always logs me into my other account. So here's our real-time database. And here's our data. So in terms of what we are looking for here, so this dbref, when I said it was C:, well, that's just an oversimplification. Our dbref is actually this URL here, and then we go to users, and then we go to our user ID, which as you can see is not user1 but is some long number which is guaranteed to be unique, and then we want all of the values under that, which are avatar URL, email, and name. These are always displayed in alphabetical order. So and then obviously to write them it's the same thing. Our dbref is this, and then the child users, and then the user ID. And you'll find that this is a very common framework to use in Firebase and NoSQL databases in general. So the other thing that we need to add obviously is some credit card information to this, and there are also some security rules that exist for our database, and at the moment our rules are just simply that anyone who is logged in can read and write. So it's not particularly secure, because if you were to log in to, if you're an authorized user and you were to log into this, you'd have complete access to read and write to the database. But we'll do some more on Firebase rules and things like that in a Firebase lecture. So look, that's basically all the changes that I've made since we last spoke, and the next thing that needs to be done is the Stripe API. Now that we're reading and writing from our database, we just have one major component to complete, and that is our payment gateway. So in the next lesson, we'll be looking at the Stripe API and how we implement that. And this will also require that we use some PHP or Node.js in order to run a backend on a service such as Heroku. Hopefully you've learned something, and if you did, click like, and in any event, subscribe to the channel to see our fully functional app develop into the App Store. In the next lesson, we'll be looking at the Stripe API, and that's sure to be very exciting and new. So look forward to seeing you soon. Cheers.